Periodically, I like to stop and take note of where we are in our Cold War chronology. By necessity, we release a video every Saturday that looks at one topic or event. We do try and frame that topic or event into the general narrative, whether one of ideology or geography or politics, but this is often limited in scope to some degree as we want to stay predominantly focused on the topic of the week. I'm your host David, and this week I want to take the chance to position some of the events and episodes we've looked at in terms of the overall regional or even global situation. This is the Cold War. The 21st century is the age of information, and I love that I can access a world of information and more with such ease, which is why I am so glad to be working with the sponsor of today's video, Magellan TV. Magellan TV offers documentaries on a wide range of topics, including biographies of some of the most evil men in the modern period. The Evolution of Evil series looks at men such as Saddam Hussein, Papa Doc Duvalier, and Muammar Gaddafi, and explains not just their rise to power, but their inhumane rule as well. And make sure to check out the other series in Magellan TV's curated playlist section to learn about the prehistoric rise of humans or the triumph of music and art. And the good news is Magellan TV has much more than that. There are more than 3,000 documentaries waiting for you. I really love the Travel the World documentaries on Magellan TV as they let me explore the world all in stunning 4K from the comfort of my own home. New documentaries are added weekly and available on most devices, including phones and PCs. Magellan TV has a kind and exclusive offer for our viewers. Click the link in the description to get a 1-month free trial and watch hundreds of history documentaries anytime, anywhere. Naturally, we can start this retrospective at a variety of different times. 1945 with the end of the war, 1948 and the Berlin Airlift, the Marshall Plan, or the final steps towards the Sovietization of Central Europe. 1950 with the Korean War, or 1953 with the death of Stalin. These could all be excellent starting points depending on the point I may want to advance and prove. So where to start? Well, I'm choosing 1949 and the communist victory in China. And why, you might ask? Well, this was the first major geopolitical change since the end of the war. The European status quo with Western and Eastern spheres of influence, agreed by Washington, Moscow, and London by 1945, was largely unchallenged. The communists stepped back in Greece, France, and Italy, while the West gave effective, unchallenged control to Moscow in places like Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland. Only Germany remained undecided, with the Western Allies looking to make the former enemy an ally, and the Soviets wanting a unified but toothless neutral barrier. But neither side was willing to go to war over this, and the post-war terms agreed to at Potsdam remained in place, even as two new Germanys emerged, neither recognizing the other. So, when Mao defeated the Republicans, driving Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan, Asia suddenly became the focus of the emerging global competition. The Stalinist concept of the inevitability of war between the socialist and imperialist systems found a second champion in Mao. Despite this, Asia still really wasn't a focus for Washington. Washington was still looking to Europe as a place of competition, despite the relative calm and stability there. When war broke out in 1950 on the Korean Peninsula then, the shock in the United States was tremendous. Despite a lack of full military commitment by the United States to the war in Korea, enough was made to fulfill the policy of containment rather than rollback, keeping South Korea in the Western sphere rather than removing communism from North Korea. The Korean War also had the accidental effect of revitalizing and transforming the Japanese economy, putting it on a path towards global economic dominance. Additionally, the war drew in China, who subsequently took captured weapons and transferred them to Indochina, where they were used to help overthrow the French. Everything has a cause and effect, right? But globally, much effort was being made to secure alliances and positions to prevent the spread of communism. Starting with the establishment of ANZUS and then CENTO and CIETO, as well as other defensive agreements, the United States and the United Kingdom worked to build a ring of allied nations that would surround the Soviet Union and China, theoretically preventing their expansion without triggering a world war. Of course, London may have been participating in some of these more to maintain their fading imperial presence in key strategic areas, such as the Middle East, but never let a mutual coincidence of wants go to waste. The Soviet perspective of these alliances was that the USSR was being surrounded by its enemies, and when combined with Barbarossa-inspired paranoia, could only mean an attack was imminent. 1953 was a turning point though. The death of Stalin and the deep and fundamental shift that then occurred in the Soviet Union changed the course of the Cold War. While Stalin believed in and had been focused on preparing for a global war, the man who eventually succeeded him, Nikita Cornlord Khrushchev, did not see inevitable war, but rather coexistence with the West until such time as what he saw as the natural advantages and benefits of socialism would triumph over the decadent imperialists. This fundamental difference in perspective led to what some historians have referred to as a period of détente, one which can be argued lasted for the rest of the Cold War. Keep in mind that while détente is often used as a specific label for the period from the late 1960s to the late 1970s, détente just means the easing of hostility or strained relations, which was really the case after Uncle Joe's death. With a few notable exceptions, the relationship between Moscow and the United States was largely stable and sought to avoid direct conflict, even if it was by means of accumulating more and more weapons to point at the other side. This is the reason the West didn't get involved in Poland or Hungary in 1956, why they scaled back the narratives of national liberation on things like Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe. It's why the Soviet Union wasn't involved in Cuba during the overthrow of Batista, not becoming an ally until after Castro had claimed power and expressly reached out to Khrushchev. So, where did the Cold War focus shift? Well, as we've spent a lot of time talking about, it largely shifted into the developing world and the emerging post-colonial world. China, the PRC that is, spent the decade consolidating its own power at home, beginning the difficult process of rapid industrialization through such disasters as the Great Leap Forward. But as the 1950s moved forward and the Soviet Union stepped back from its role as the leader of the global socialist revolution, China stepped forward to try and assume the mantle. Ties to socialist movements in Southeast Asia were deepened, territorial disputes with India were also kindled. But this shift in roles was not an amicable one. Khrushchev's Moscow still saw itself as the natural global leader of socialism, while Beijing began to view Khrushchev and the Soviets as decadent traitors to the cause, more focused on building individual homes and supplying luxuries like vacuum cleaners than fomenting socialist revolution. This split would by 1961 lead to a total collapse of formal relations between the two countries, one that would last for decades, creating two competing socialist worlds. But it wasn't just China that came to the forefront of communist attention in Asia. Vietnam, removing the yoke of French colonialism, found itself divided, largely along ideological lines, and a new future battleground of the Cold War emerged. Indonesia in the 1950s found itself with a large and influential communist party, as Sukarno used it as a political counterweight to the powerful and pro-Western military. It even succeeded in preventing a Western-supported coup d'etat. Indonesia also was a key member in the attempt to broker a non-Cold War power option for nations, the non-aligned movement. Although not formally created as such until 1961, its inception at the 1955 Bandung Conference was intended to form a third, non-ideological bloc for nations to participate with on the global stage. Comprised largely of post-colonial Asian and African nations, the idea was sound but never found a way to exert itself as a true third option with global influence. Or maybe the ability to sit the Cold War out on the sidelines was a good enough option. But the creation of this third way was seen as problematic, by the United States anyway, who approached anything less than cooperation as suspicious, if not hostile, which helped to drive a wedge into relations where none might have been otherwise existing. India, independent since 1947, found itself with bright prospects for its future, one it looked to forge along a middle road. Its inability, however, to equitably solve not only domestic sectarian disputes, but also international border disputes with neighboring Pakistan and China would eventually bog down that future. But the 1950s were filled with hope as Prime Minister Nehru helped forge the non-aligned movement. Rival Pakistan, however, joined both the anti-communist CENTO and SEATO alliances, less out of fear of the spread of communism and more as a bulwark against India. Although this never amounted to much, the United States used Pakistan's Western-leaning alliances to form its own bilateral defense agreements, establishing CIA listening stations and even air stations there, which were even used to stage U-2 spy plane missions over the Soviet Union. The closeness of the US-Pakistan relationship that was forming would help push India, eventually anyway, into an uneasy partnership with the Soviet Union. Looking a little further west into the Persian Gulf region and the Middle East, the 1950s was a period of extreme change. While a CIA-led coup firmly solidified the Shah and his oil wells into power in Iran to the benefit of the United Kingdom and the United States, the rest of the region became more volatile as other states were leery of possible Western intervention in their own domestic affairs. The British-led Arab League, meant to maintain London's power in the region by proxy, was undone by the 1950s. Egypt, widely recognized as the center of the Arab world, saw not only the overthrow of its pro-British monarchy, but the establishment of a secular pan-nationalist government under the leadership of Gamal Nasser. Nasser undertook a mission to redraw the borders of the Middle East, with Egypt leading the way. His chosen methodology to do so was by taking control of the Suez Canal, putting him not only on a collision course with London and Paris, but also Tel Aviv, who looked to further secure their own tenuous position in the region. The Suez Crisis demonstrated to the world that France and the United Kingdom were now second-rate powers, as the United States arm-twisted to restore order in the region. Even the Soviet Union sided with the United States to force the United Kingdom and France to stand down. The ripple effects from Suez were tremendous as the Middle East became a dominant region for global affairs. The Algerians stepped up their efforts to win independence, and Lebanon became a focus of involvement from all of the region's players. Egypt and Syria briefly flirted with a unitary government, and Iraq overthrew its own monarchy, removing Western influence there. The Soviet Union hoped in all of this to gain influence and capitalize on its perceived standing as a non-imperialist power in the region, and in the middle of all of this was Israel, of course, a regional military power not yet truly allied to the West, but being pushed in that direction, the result of threats posed by other powers in the region, like Egypt and Syria, who were economically, if not ideologically, receiving assistance from the Soviet Union. In sub-Saharan Africa, the decolonization movement was gaining speed and traction both through peaceful legislative processes, like in Gold Coast, what was to become Ghana, but also by means of violent rebellion, such as that conducted by the Mau Mau in Kenya. The stories of Cold War sub-Saharan Africa begin in the 1950s, but really come to prominence during the 1960s and beyond as European empires crumbled and new nations emerged, with the superpowers each looking to stake their influence while these new nations worked to make their own way forward. Ideology and nationalism were becoming more and more intertwined as groups looked to secure their share of power. Moving into the Americas, the 1950s saw the United States looking to continue its hegemony over the region. A CIA-backed coup in Guatemala was the first major international event of the Cold War to take place in the Western Hemisphere, a coup that was felt necessary in order not just to defend the country from the threat of communism, but one conducted to protect the overseas business interests of American shareholders. And Guatemala also set a stage of confidence for CIA-led regime change actions that would unfold in other parts of the Americas, like Cuba in the 1960s. From the standpoint of science and technology, the 1950s ushered in a strategic revolution in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik. Suddenly, with rocket technology, the Soviet Union had the power and ability to strike at the United States directly, something that hadn't really existed in any meaningful way up until that point. When married to thermonuclear technology, the prospect of a winnable nuclear war began to fade, while an arms race between the superpowers began to take hold, each looking for a technological breakthrough that would lend them an advantage over the other. And as for nuclear weapons themselves in the 1950s, well, their use was considered at least several times, not only in Korea, but also during the Taiwan Straits crisis, the 1950 Lebanon crisis, and during the Viet Minh siege of Dien Bien Phu. Obviously, the use of nuclear weapons by either side would likely have resulted in escalation and retaliation on a wider, probably global scale. After all, a regional event just won't stay regional if nuclear weapons become involved. Domestically for the United States, the 1950s is often rightfully seen as a period of conservative reactionism. Attempts to put the feminist genie that had been unleashed during the war years back in the bottle were somewhat successful and were painted as the American way, a method to fight the evils of communism. Straying from this American way was seen as deviant and made one's politics and even national loyalty suspect. But changes were starting to happen. Racial segregation was being broken down, one burning bus and one lunch counter at a time. A nation that was supposed to represent freedom and equality for all could do no less at home as it fought the evils of communism and its own message of equality abroad. So where does this put us? Well, it means that as the 1950s come to a close, a huge amount of change has happened around the world. The threat of global war was more than present, but the feeling of its inevitability had diminished as overall coexistence became a goal. New nations, changing relationships, and ripple effects all made their impact felt. Regions that were once assumed to be future flashpoints faded into secure monotony, while new and often obscure flashpoints made themselves known. Events in one place naturally had impacts and effect elsewhere, sometimes nearby, but often on the other side of the globe. Nothing was occurring in isolation. As the channel moves forward into coverage of the 1960s, I would ask each one of you to take note of these connections, influences, and impacts. The 60s were a decade of change and challenges in the West, while in the Soviet Union, they're often considered to be somewhat of a golden age of the country with growth, security, and hope on the minds of many. And this was all exported and shared around the world as new mediums, from movies and television to the expansion of commercial air travel, began to radically shrink the world. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and have pressed the bell button, knowing full well that when you press it, it is going to have long-term and possibly unexpected ramifications. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, I will leave you with the words of JFK. In the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.